High functioning anxiety, one definition is that it's essentially having anxiety but being really good at acting like you don't. On the outside, it looks like you've got everything together. So people would look at you and they wouldn't say that's a person with anxiety. They would see someone who's successful, has a lot of friends, looks like they're very well organized. On the inside, it's a very different story.
Georgie, welcome to the show.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
What is the difference between stress and anxiety?
Such a good question. Look, stress tends to resolve when a stressful event passes. So, usually we might have like a deadline when we have a work project due, for example, or exams coming up. And while that can be stressful in the moment and perhaps in the lead up as well, once the stress goes away, the stressing event goes away, we tend to go back to our baseline of feeling pretty calm most of the time. And anxiety is more of a chronic underlying sense that we're not quite safe, that we got to watch our back, we're a little hyper vigilant. We might have a pervasive, persistent worry in our minds that is not constantly present, but much more occurring on a daily basis, regardless of the stressful events in our lives. In fact, often we'll look around ourselves and see that, well, I've got a roof over my head, I've got food in the kitchen. Like, what have I got to be worried about? I'm safe, but the body doesn't feel safe.
That's really interesting that I guess a lot of it is the time scale as well, the external environmental factors that will spike stress up, but actually anxiety is that thing that kind of lives with you. Because I think it's quite easy to perhaps experience some of these symptoms of anxiety, like broad scale anxiety, and say, I'm just stressed. I'm just stressed. But what would be the different ways to approach it? Like, how would you say approaching stress and how would you say approaching anxiety? Like, what would be the difference in your approach to that if you were talking to someone who's experiencing these symptoms?
Well, it's actually really interesting because I've just been through a stressful period in my life where I have had a new book come out and I've been doing the launch for that. And that required me to fly to Sydney and be on TV, national TV. So that was a stressful experience. And everything in my body looked and felt like anxiety in that moment. And we could also call it anxiety. But once that moment of being on live TV was done, we went back to more of a baseline. But there was a recovery through that process and a way of supporting myself through the stress. And so I see stress as something that we must be aware of, that it's happening, and take care of ourselves. Otherwise, we can burn out and we will get sick and things happen. So it's really important to do a lot of self-care. And the way that we care for ourselves through stressful events is similar to how we care for ourselves through anxiety as well. Things that regulate our nervous system, and that just means helping ourselves to feel calm. But there are some lovely tools that we have. There are body based exercises we can do. There are certain positions we can get our bodies into. There's breath work we can do. And a lot of also noticing the way we're speaking to ourselves. A lot of the work that I do is around working with our inner child and learning to be kind and loving to that sensitive, scared little child within us. And even navigating stressful moments, it can be really helpful to have that. But on a more general sense with anxiety long term, yeah, we got to be chatting to our inner child and have that relationship built if we want to really start to move forward with it and create a lasting sense of calm and confidence.
And one of the things you talk about is the high functioning anxiety, which I find really interesting, like reading through, I guess, how you would define it. And I want to jump into it in more detail in a second. But just to open this kind of area of our conversation up, what is the difference between anxiety broad scale, as we would identify it, and high functioning anxiety?
So good. Well, we have our sort of generalized anxiety, which tends to interrupt our lives in many ways, and it can get quite debilitating. High functioning anxiety, one definition that's really simple is that it's essentially having anxiety but being really good at acting like you don't. And the way I like to say it is, on the outside, it looks like you've got everything together. So people would look at you and they wouldn't say that's a person with anxiety. They would see someone who's perhaps successful or has a lot of friends or is, looks like they're very well organized, perhaps. And this is partly the perfectionism that plays into it. But see, on the inside, it's a very different story. And we might be feeling a lot of pressure internally to constantly achieve, to have our life organized, to have a lot of friends, to have these you know trophies of success that we can sort of tell ourselves, okay, now I'm enough, now I'm good enough. There's a lot of perfectionistic qualities around that as well, and a mean inner critic typically that is fueling the whole show. So that's what high functioning anxiety looks like, and it tends to occur with our high achievers and people who are, yeah, like generally taking care of their day-to-day tasks and functioning quite well, but yeah, still dragging around this sense of dread and fear and worry and self-doubt.
Do you think that to an extent, the high functioning anxiety of these high achievers is what makes them such high achievers? Like, is there a link between that drive from running away from feeling, imperfect or feeling not good enough or feeling like a failure? Is that part of what makes them so successful in a strange way?
That's such a good question. And it's actually a belief that keeps us stuck in the loop. And I can speak from personal experience because, of course, this is my story too, that I used to believe that that was what was creating success in my life, was the anxiety itself. Like it's this superpower. And hey, that's one reframe we can have on it, to anything that makes us befriend or feel closer to our anxiety rather than trying to get rid of it and get away from it or see it as pesky and annoying, is useful and moving us in the right direction. But there is another option. There is an option where we can achieve things and go about going after our goals and our dreams in our life and getting things done that are fulfilling without sacrificing our mental health and feeling like we're overgiving and we're depleted and we're heading for burnout. So it's like there's definitely a way we could say that yes, there is anxiety potentially fueling that success. But then what really is success if you're anxious and, not feeling really good about yourself? We can get to that destination from a much more heart-centered place where we feel really good about ourselves and it's the whole journey is aligned with our values. And that to me is much more of a success.
And you mentioned previously about the high functioning anxiety is often linked with burnout. And perhaps that's kind of squaring the reason why the burnout occurs, because sure, okay, the high functioning anxiety short term may drive you to work more hours, to do more, to have a higher output, to have balance a social life alongside a really busy job, to, start a business and have a side hustle and all of the things that are quite popular, we want to achieve. And perhaps that actually is the burnout is because of that. And if we did it in a more sustainable way, we could actually go on a lot further. We could actually feel, I guess, less stressed in the interim. I was speaking to Sophie Bertrand. She's a nutritionist, and we were just. I love how these conversations. You speak to a nutritionist, and it goes off into health in general. And she's like, if you have a really like stressful job, why are you doing a HIIT workout first thing in the morning? Your cortisol is up, your heart rate is up, you're breathing really fast, and really, when you're breathing really fast, your body is thinking, okay, where's the predator? Where am I at? It's your body doesn't. If it's difficult for it to differentiate between different types of adrenaline. So then if we are thinking, okay, this is my morning treat because, I'm getting up early to, because I'm connecting with my body and so on. Yeah, we're spiking our stress levels so high before having a full day of meetings or a busy day at work, or even if you're just at home with children and, you're very stressed because that's very stressful in its own right. It's just really interesting how these things we might not even think about. We think, oh, well, it's good because people who are fit do HIIT workouts, therefore I must, even though it's actually the cause of this massive spike in anxiety throughout our day.
And exercise can be beneficial, of course, but as you said, we have to be mindful of where it's kind of playing into the whole picture. And certainly, a lot of the exercise I do is much more. Love low intensity. I love long walks. I love yoga and those kind of things, and maybe some weights and that kind of stuff. But this is where it gets really interesting is we can start to inquire as to where those drives in us to succeed and want more and more and more are really coming from. And often we will find, I mean, it's a classic story that when you hit the goal, when you get to the thing, you get the job, you get the car, you buy the house, whatever the things are that you want, then we want more. It's not enough. The goalposts move. And even just knowing that can sort of bring up some interesting questions for ourselves. It's like, what am I heading for? Because once I get there, this thing that I think is going to finally make my life good, and finally I'll be happy, and finally I'll just relax and be content. Well, it's never going to be enough. And we can also really inquire as to what gave you the idea to go for these specific goals. Is that actually authentically you? Or is that something that has been subconsciously wired into you from perhaps subtle expectations or overt from parents? Or perhaps your parents, when you were growing up, they always celebrated, highly intellectual people. And so you always feel like you've got to, be the smartest in the room and go for academia. Or maybe they celebrated really creative people and it feels like you need to go and achieve a lot in the creative world. So we are so conditioned by our upbringings and our childhoods into the people that we are now. And it can feel deeply unfulfilling to pursue a life that is someone else's dream for you as opposed to your own unique dream. And to come back to that authentic desire, it takes a bit of inquiry and work to do that. But these are some ways, Emily, we can start to figure out, are the things that I'm going for in my life and trying to achieve actually coming from a place that will more deeply satisfy me, and yeah, what's the point of it all at the end of the day?
It's quite scary and quite raw to kind of look at it like that because obviously, I mean, what you're saying, it makes total sense. But to strip ourselves back of who we are and, from you mentioned the example of childhood there, that is, linking to the person who we've always been. And no matter what point you get, you could be 40 when you learn this and you try this. You could be 50, you could be 60, you could be in your 20s. You're going to have decades of things to strip back
Mm,
and figuring out, hold on, I'm actually living my life for someone completely different. For someone who I don't make, like, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's someone who, your teacher at school, or maybe it's someone who you went to school with, or your friend's parent. It can be so far back. It's very frightening. And I think it takes quite a lot of looking backwards to actually find out who exactly it is. And maybe when we find it out, we go, oh my goodness, it's probably someone who doesn't really care about us, not because, they don't care, but like, but they're not in our lives anymore. Yet we
yeah,
hold on to this. It's like that classic thing of girls in school are told by a PE teacher that they're not sporty, therefore they're never sporty.
that's
Like it's that sort of example, isn't it?
yeah, I was that kid.
I think
Yeah,
a lot of people were, sadly. That's
yeah.
another thing, isn't it?
Yes, and even rediscovering, like, that authentic desire for exercise and movement. Like, sometimes when I go for my long walks, I go on the beach and I just, like, feel like running for a bit, but I let that feeling in my body kinda guide me, which has been so liberating. And so, as you said, yes, it can be a bit scary, and there is naturally grief in this process, and I work with women of all ages from, in their 20s to I've worked with a woman in her late 70s before as well. And there is no point at which we're ever going to regret doing this work because of the fact that it just feels so liberating to finally realize who you are and live for you. But I will say that a lot of these cases of anxiety and even depression are so much governed by us not living as our authentic selves and this conditioning that happens when we're children, when we're sort of guided to be someone that we're not, but we're told we're too sensitive. So then we learn, okay, this emotion I'm feeling is not okay, or it's too much and it's not accepted. I've got to push that down. And we get really confused about our emotional world. And that really does come explain so much of what we experience later as adults in with our mental health.
And the more emotion that we push down, it just means the more that's gonna explode at some point in our lives,
That's it.
which is quite terrifying,
Yeah.
and we carry it about with us as well. Do you know, we actually carry it in our bodies, in our minds, and yeah, I think we've all experienced them when a random thought, like, pops up and we thought, "Oh my goodness, that's, like, an experience I've not thought about." It could be so long ago, it could be last year, do you know, it could just be something insignificant. You think, "Wow, I'm carrying all this round with me, all this baggage." And the more you kind of carry with you, then I guess you can see like the links to like midlife crisis or, you know, a bit of a breakdown
Mhm.
because it's too much. It's a lot to carry. And if you don't go through it, which can be painful, I guess, going through it, you do carry it like it is a burden, like it is heavy. It is a huge emotional thing that you are just being shutting down, which is so scary.
Yeah, and to be honest, Emily, it's still a bit of a mystery for me, even as I see women come to me and they've been living their life kind of, on the surface, disconnected from this emotional world because that's the best way they could cope for so long. And then all of a sudden, it could be in their 30s when they become a mom, or it could be in their 40s or their 50s. Like, at some point they just hit this I can't go back to that old way of coping, and I need a new approach. And it usually looks like a breakdown, like you were saying, but the mystery is, like, why does it happen at that point? Why is it that they can sort of, you know we're almost like these ticking time bombs, and all of a sudden we are called to grow and transform to something that is working, that is more functional than what we've been doing in the past, in the dysfunction. And yeah, I don't have an answer for that and why it happens like that, but it just seems to be there's an accumulation through life, and then certain triggers and buttons are pushed, and then all of a sudden we got to do something about it.
Yeah, there's a certain level of tolerance, and I think we know people who probably have like lower tolerance and are more prone to those kind of breakdown cycles. And then there's people who probably pile it all up, and you think, wow, they are invincible. And of course, it's just bigger and better than ever in terms of the explosion of emotion.
Yes.
And the breakdown. It's just a messier thing because at the end of the day, it's how humans work, it's how our brain works,
Yeah.
and maybe people can store it differently, but it's generally going to be the same response, which
Yes.
is reassuring and sad at the same time, isn't it?
We are all human. We all have emotions, and whether we're feeling them or not, they are going to come out, and they will try to come out in different ways. All for our benefit, but most of us don't have that perspective on our emotions. We're a bit scared of them.
And the link between anxiety and depression, can you talk me through that? Because often it goes hand in hand. I have anxiety and depression. Or you have depression and it leads to anxiety, or anxiety and it leads to depression. Why is that?
Mm. Yeah, well, with anxiety, we're kind of in this like intense fighting for our lives. We're trying to survive. We're worrying about all the things that could go wrong in our future, and that takes a lot of energy, and it can be quite exhausting. And so it's quite common to then dip into this depression where all of a sudden we're tired of fighting, and we essentially are in our deep rest, if we can look at depressed in that way. So that could be one of the reasons why we see this fluctuation. But it really, the more and more I'm in this world, and the more years that go by working with people, I just see not that much difference, other than in depression, we may have more sadness, but honestly, underneath anxiety, there's a lot of sadness. It's just emotions that are stuck in our body that we're unable to feel and release, that we've been afraid of releasing, especially as children, when we're told to toughen up, or that we're not allowed to feel this, or you're making mummy upset now with your emotions, and all of these things. We can't do anything about that, so we have to hold our emotions in or find a way to work through it on our own, which is terrifying for a child. And then as adults, we're still stuck in that. We might be experiencing anxiety, thinking, I've got to deal with this big scary feeling inside me all by myself, or stuck with depression thinking, oh no, look at me, I'm just such a sad sack and I can't get out of this feeling and I'm so sad all the time, and this is terrible and what's the point? But both are experiences where we are disconnected from ourselves. We are not connected with who we truly are. And we're confused about that. And so we're trying to live our lives for someone else, as we were talking about earlier, and believing really disempowered things about ourselves, that we're helpless, hopeless, and that things can't really get better. In depression and anxiety, we'll have both of those thoughts running through our minds, but it's not true. It's just that that was true when we were children. We were helpless, we were powerless, and we're sort of stuck in that experience even as adults, unless we go back and we resolve some of these things, which is a lot of the work that I do with the subconscious mind.
The subconscious mind. Wow, I feel like that's just we've just approached the precipice of this endless depth that we could dive into. And the subconscious mind, it's just it baffles me in like a such I just find it so interesting, the subconscious mind, and like placebo effects and this whole kind of like this whole world that really rules our life, you know? Like, to what percentage does our conscious mind rule our life, and what percentage does our subconscious mind rule our life? You know? It's actually terrifying because what are our inner thoughts? What's our inner dialogue? What are we saying to ourselves? What are we believing? Do you know? And manifestation, whatever your views on it, to an extent, you know, manifesting what you think in your mind of yourself or where you want to go or where you want to be, just in terms of like mental voice in your head, not taking time necessarily to manifest, but just what you're telling yourself in that inner dialogue. It's probably going to happen because of what you're saying. This is like, I'm not talking about manifesting as, you know, a practice. I'm just saying what you would say to yourself. And anything ahead of that, of course, will make a difference in whatever way you want. But just whatever you're saying to yourself, it is that inner voice and you're dictating where you're going. You know, oh, I'm going to get this, I'm going to get it. Like, you know, people with high self-confidence are often linked to people who are leading a company or leading a team or leading, you know, and that can obviously link to arrogance as well. And that can have all of these different ramifications of a personality type. But that is because maybe it's bluff and bluster, but you know, people think, well, they know what they're doing, I'm going to follow them, you know, because they're confident about it. It can be as easy as that in terms of, you know, whether it's all just a facade. And I'm not saying it all is, like, I'm sure sometimes it isn't. But if we pretend to ourselves that we're confident, people are probably going to listen to us more, which is terrifying when you think about it. But yeah, lead me through what your views are in the subconscious mind. Let's tap into it. Let's not run away from this topic.
Oh my goodness. In contrast to you, I find it incredibly exciting and fascinating endlessly what's in the subconscious, because, and perhaps it's because I've got more of a grasp of like how to work with it, right? So I, I use this metaphor a lot where when there's something, usually an emotion or a fear that we're not aware of, um, we don't understand it. It's like when you're a little kid and you've got a monster under the bed, or you think there's a monster under the bed and you think it's going to reach out and grab your ankle if you step down. But what happens is when we actually stop and we turn the lights on and together we shine a torch and we look under the bed, we see what's there. We can see, well, there's no monster here. Maybe there's a little mouse or something moving around, and now we know what it is. We can do something about it. We can work with it. And what we do if we're not looking at our subconscious mind or doing any of that inner work is we have this perception like there's this monster under the bed that we're going to discover. When in fact, when we do look at it, we have the power now of the information, the understanding of ourselves to shift things, to realize, oh my God, I've been believing this thing that isn't true, that's really holding me back. And we can take charge. And so maybe you have been telling yourself your whole life that you're not the kind of person that's a leader, that no one trusts you, that people don't respect you. And if you go back to your past, it doesn't even have to be big, gruesome things that have happened. It could literally just be that you were the youngest child in the family and you were always the baby. And so no one respected you. And you were the one that had to follow and look up to your big siblings. And it's simply an identity you took on as part of the family group, as part of fitting in. And when we see it, we can break through that and see, well, you're not in that group now. Like, you are a grown woman. You are much older and you've got the awareness to see you're not the little one now, and people can respect you and do respect you, and you're worthy of that, and you can start to shift into being this leader and seeing yourself like that, because even the most influential leaders of the world still have their doubts. They still have an inner critic. They still have that voice. And I think it's important that we see that we can have that voice and also really strengthen this other part of us that is loving, that believes in us, that cheers us on no matter what. And then it's much easier to be bored by whatever lame stuff your inner critic is saying to you, and keep moving forward. So that's why I'm fascinated by the subconscious. I'm like, great, I can use this tool. If there's anything that is holding me back, I want to know about it so I can work through it and help clear that and become unstoppable, which we really can do. And hey, what if we can achieve our dreams whilst feeling a sense of steady calm within ourselves along the way? How cool is that? How fun does life become when we are, coming from that perspective rather than trying to make up for all the ways that we're inadequate and not good enough, which is often what has us clawing and desperately trying to achieve in that more stressful way.
I think when you say it like that, we'll all be thinking, well, of course I want to have that way. That sounds so much better, the calm way. But until we do a bit of self-examination of how do I deal with things? How do I deal with these stress-inducing and anxiety-provoking situations? How do I deal with this everyday mundane, you know, way that my brain works, way that my life is? Do I need to restructure things? How can I actually examine that? Hold on, where is that coming from? Like, why am I feeling like that? Sometimes, we'll feel an emotion, and I'll be like, why do I feel like this? And then I'm like, oh, because I don't know. I used the example before, but it seems very very silly to like use. But I think people can identify. It's like, why am I feeling so irritated right now? It's because I was going to buy something online and it's sold out. Like that is it. You think, I'm carrying this round in this foul mood because of this silly thing. And then when you identify it, you think, well, actually, I don't care about that because that is ridiculous. I'm going to move on with my life. And you shed it. But I think if we go through it, and often I guess, I mean, I say, it's a silly example, but often I think it can be silly things. It can be those little silly interactions of, we were walking along the street and someone bumped into us and they didn't even say anything. And you think, oh, like, what is that? And it carries in you and you feel this tension. You're like, how dare they do that? But actually, it's not impacting your day. You go on with it. It wasn't very pleasant, but it's fine. But you can still hold that by lunchtime. You can still be like, what is up with you? It's because you're holding this grudge of this person you're never going to see again, probably, who maybe, they've just come from a terrible appointment, or maybe they're heading to a funeral, or maybe they're just having a really horrible day, and it is that thing of, if you could see everybody in the street and what's actually going on in their head, just in like summarized in 3 words even, imagine how differently you'd approach it. You'd say, oh, actually, hold on, after you, or hold the door open, or people would do that for you. It's not necessarily that we always have to give, but we would receive when we need it as well.
Mm.
But it's masked, isn't it? I guess it's masked in this perfectionism that you're talking about. Oh my goodness, it all links together. Look at that.
And you know what's interesting, Emily, if we want to take that to another level,
Do.
is those silly moments where you feel an emotional response that does not when you look at it, it's not proportionate to the situation. Well, those ones are really interesting, because let's say you couldn't get the thing you wanted online because it was sold out. Maybe, just maybe, that's touching on a little wound that's been sitting in you for a long time, from when you were a little girl and you were 5 years old and your brother and sister got to have the freshly baked cookies, but by the time you got there they were all gone and you missed out, and it was so frustrating and so annoying. And this was a much bigger thing, a bigger pattern for you than just that moment missing out on the shopping cart. And that's what our subconscious can help us see. Or if the person on the street bumps your shoulder, maybe there's a something for you around injustice or people who aren't considerate, because you always had this parent growing up who just didn't consider you, didn't see you, didn't make concessions for you. And so to have this rudeness in this person that's just doing this selfish act really pushes a button. So that's also where our subconscious can take us. And the whole reason for that is not to end on this like endless rabbit hole of where's everything coming from and I have to know everything. But maybe then we can go back to the little girl who experienced those things and help create a resolution to what didn't get resolved in the past. And that means that the next time the thing sells out or the person does the rude thing in the street, you're not as triggered by it because we've helped to heal that little wound from its origin so that you can be more peaceful now in your life.
It's a lot to think about, isn't it? That's a lot to think about. And I want to break down the high functioning anxiety. You describe it on your social media, you described it as 5 Ps. And I read through them initially and I thought, okay, that's great, fantastic. I want to know more about that. And then I read through the description of each one and I thought, ooh, okay, this is a bit close to home. Oh, I can see myself in this one because I think anxiety is a label which can, I guess, manifest in lots of different forms. And I would not label myself as anxious, but I have moments of anxiety and moments of stress. And I think a lot of people could relate to that. But this high functioning anxiety, I think it's a different form. And I just want to learn more and tap into how you define it. So I think I'll read out. So the 5 Ps are where perfectionism, people pleasing, pressure, procrastination, and persistent anxiety. So can we just go through them one by one and maybe just expound on it and just explain it? Maybe people can identify it in their own life. And I guess also I don't want people to feel like they're being labeled in a way because I think perhaps maybe well you can also discuss what your views are on this. But I was thinking, is it helpful to have this label? Would I feel better if I was labeled as this or if I wasn't labeled as that? If I didn't meet the criteria or if I did? And I think I think it can probably work in tandem because we could use it as a crutch. Oh, well, that's just me. I'm anxious. That's how I work. Or you could say, no, actually, I'm anxious. So this is how I deal with things. So I'm actually not crazy. Or, this is part of something to work on, which
Mm.
I guess maybe we'll start off with that. What are your views on balancing that label?
Oh, such a great question. And I'm pro labels for that initial understanding, but we don't want to attach to it in the way that then that shapes my identity. And now I'm this anxious person. I've been branded with this tattooed on my forehead, and that's all I'll ever be. Because really, when we're experiencing anxiety, it's just a degree of intensification of a human emotion. Like you said, we can all feel anxious, and some of us are feeling that more persistent in a more persistent way. So I am actually one of the first things that I take my clients through is reducing the label and referring to anxiety not as my anxiety. My anxiety is so bad. I want them to say the anxiety. I've been feeling anxiety. There is this sensation of discomfort moving through my body at the moment. It doesn't mean it's always constantly there and it's part of my personality. So 100% with you, Emily. And I put those kind of definitions out there for high functioning anxiety because of how that inner critic and that way of feeling on the inside is such a call to look at ourselves and do this inner work, which does create such a sense of relief and liberation in our lives. It doesn't fix everything, but it certainly makes life much more easeful. And the vast majority of us, whether we, fit into that category or not, are having difficulties with being human. We're having difficulties in just like living this life and feeling okay with ourselves. Every single one of us has some kind of belief that I'm not enough in some way. And so if reading through that description and that label activates something in you that makes you go, actually, I didn't realize this, it doesn't have to be this way. That's the kind of invitation that I like to put out there for people to say, well, yeah, we don't have to walk around feeling this horrible about ourselves. We can actually learn to integrate a lot of things and feel much more whole within ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. So let's jump into P number one, perfectionism. Go for
Yeah.
it.
So perfectionism is really this sense that I need everything perfect and I need it done in a perfect way. And for me, what this looked like when anxiety was really intense for me, it happened when I was 19 years old. And I'd always been the high achiever at school. It benefited me at the start, but when my dad left and my family sort of broke up from that, and it was quite devastating, anxiety hit me in a whole new way, and my perfectionism kicked in to try to grasp control of my life that felt like it was spinning out of control. And so I went for, I've got to eat the perfect way, I've got to wear the perfect clothes, I have to, anything I could actually control in that very unsettling, unstable time of my life. And it was all external, of course, I went for, and that's pretty much what perfectionism looks like. It was never good enough, and I always needed things in a certain way, and that is exhausting because life is not within our control, and there is so much that will be tormented by if we are stuck in perfectionism. Another way it comes up is like I can't cope with a change of plans. Like I need my regular schedule, and if oh no, the Pilates class, I missed it this week. Oh no, now my whole exercise routine and everything's messed up. So yeah, it can be quite torturous.
And you also described it as having it all together, which I guess is, or like being viewed as having it all together, most importantly, which I think kind of leads on very much with the perfectionism of not only telling yourself you have it all together, but you must have others view you as you having it all together, which is quite terrifying for the people around you because that also will make them feel quite inferior, I guess, because
Yes.
it's this fake level of facade that you're
Yes.
putting up this unachievable mountain that you are pretending to be.
Mm.
It's yeah, there's lots of layers.
Falsely perceiving that that's going to make you more loved and more accepted and liked. But the reality is, really perfect people, anyone that seems really perfect, just think of like a perfect supermodel or celebrity or someone, they're really hard to relate to. It's hard to connect to those kind of people. And the second a celebrity, let's say, does say, "Oh, like I just love kicking back in my tracksuit and eating, potato chips and just watching this show," and you're like, "Oh my god, I sit in my tracksuit and I eat potato chips and watch my show." We feel like we can relate to them and we feel closer. So it's the flaws, it's the imperfections that actually create connection, and that's the big misconception to override there. But yes, I'm we should probably move on to the next P.
Yeah, yeah. Next one, people pleasing, which is very linked onto it.
Yeah, so people pleasing, and that's usually where we don't have very good boundaries for ourselves. And so we'll say yes to things we don't want to say yes to. We struggle to say no, even though everything in our body is screaming, no, I don't want to show up to this thing. I don't want to go there. We will do things trying to get other people's approval. So, yeah, there's a little bit of overlap in it, but it does really look like struggling to assert what you need. And that will often look like, I mean, the stereotype would be the exhausted mother who's just giving, giving, giving to everyone, even though, she's broken out in a rash and she's, got a headache and she's just still up, cooking and cleaning and doing things for everyone.
And pressure.
Yeah, that relentless pressure is usually coming from our inner critic saying, "You're not good enough. You're not doing enough. So you need to do more, 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 more." And this is so funny because we would think that that would happen for people who aren't very successful, but it happens for the successful high achievers just as much, if not more. This sense that, yeah, you could have $1 million, you could have a beautiful house, you could have all sorts of things, and it's not enough. We've got to have more. We've got to have more. We're trying to feed this insatiable emptiness within ourselves that says, I'm inadequate, I'm not good enough. And that is no way to live. And we don't have to keep living from that place, letting that control us in our lives.
It reminds me of the hedonic treadmill that just keeps on going round and round. We must have more. You said earlier, you'll achieve something, you'll buy something, you might have saved for it, and then suddenly, okay, I want to go on the next thing. We've all experienced it. Whether it's something my life will change when I go to visit New York. My life will change. And
Mm.
then you go to New York and you have a great time, or maybe you don't like it, that's kind of irrelevant. And then you think, okay, I'm still me. I still have to go to work on Monday. I still have to do whatever I said I would do. You don't change. You still are the same person. Yet that pressure, then you'll move on to the next thing. Now I must go to LA. I must go to LA. My life will change. And I think that it's not always a bad thing to have that drive, but when it's unchecked, it can just keep going and it'll rule our life with this consumption. And it's that moment of, that it's that saying, like, where you are now is 5 years ago where you prayed you'd be, like, and then we miss the moment. We blink and we suddenly we're on to the next thing. We're not even thinking, oh, this thing I was worrying about, it's now worked out and I'm in this situation. And you're not even looking around to see that moment, to appreciate that moment, because you're worrying about when you have to do something in the future, which actually is, it's not relevant right now. What if this happens? Whether it's catastrophizing something that's never going to happen, or just, an upcoming deadline or an upcoming date that in your diary that you don't want to do something.
Mm.
You're ruining the moment right now for yourself.
Yeah. It's almost like that saying, "No matter where you go, there you are." Like, you'll still have yourself, whether you're living in Bali or New York or wherever. And I've certainly done quite a lot of travel in my life, trying to, and especially in my 20s, trying to escape those parts of myself, and then really seeing like, oh, I still am here. Like, it's just a bit sunnier. I'm in a bikini, yay. But I still have those same thoughts. And so, yeah, this is why really learning to turn the volume down on some of that pressure, and understanding where it's coming from, especially when it's coming from, I'm going to use the word trauma, but don't, like, overthink that word. Just if it's coming from a place of emotional pain, which it often is, like someone somewhere, we got the idea that we're just not good enough as we are, and we need to keep striving. If we can resolve some of that stuff, it certainly turns the volume down, and it helps us to feel a lot more peaceful with just where we are.
Yeah. I love that example of, you're traveling around and you're still you. And I guess that, yeah, people go to find themselves, as the saying goes, around the world, which is totally fine because exposing yourself to new experiences and environments, I guess, is very advantageous. But ultimately, you're not going to completely change. You're still going to be you. You're still going to have the same parents, the same friends, or the same background, the same upbringing.
Mm.
So it is an interesting model to think of. And I'm very interested about the next P, which is procrastination. I was quite surprised actually to see it featuring in this list because you
Mm.
think high functioning anxiety. Why would we procrastinate? Why is that included in the list? Tell me, Georgie, why is it?
It's super common, and it's not a major issue for everyone, but it certainly comes up a lot. And one of the reasons is because we're so perfectionistic that we can't even start. It's like, if I can't give this all of my everything and this isn't perfect, why even bother? And so I'll just put it off, I'll put it off, I'll put it off. And that's pretty much where the procrastination comes from. It's a culmination of that mean inner critic saying, who are you to even try this or do this? And who do you think you are? All of it. And it tends to make us stop doing the thing or hold back from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very true, isn't it? It's
That's
very
that's
true.
usually, yeah. And then what do we tell ourselves when we're procrastinating? Oh, I'm so lazy. Look at me. I'm such a, useless person. And it's like, only making it worse. It's
The
only
inner
making,
voice strikes again. Yeah.
yes, it's not creating motivation, which is what we think it's gonna do. In fact, shame is usually how our parents have tried to motivate us, but it doesn't create motivation. When someone tells you, "Come on, help me do this thing." "Oh, why aren't you helping me? You're so lazy. Get up and help." Um, you know, like, "You never help me." It doesn't make you want to help. It's not motivating. Whereas if someone said, "Oh, Emily, you're so helpful, and I really always appreciate it when you support me. Would you come and help me with this thing?" Oh, now I want to do that. Right? So there's a difference in how we can motivate ourselves, and if we're speaking to ourselves with kindness, we'll start to move through that procrastination. It's much easier to take the next step and the next step.
And number 5, persistent anxiety.
Mm. Yeah, well, I think that one speaks for itself. It's not always daily for people, but a lot of the women I work with, it is daily. Uh, Often we might go through phases of it. So we'll have a good week and then a really anxious week. Sometimes we feel a lot of anxiety around the lead up to our period, which is very common with those hormonal fluctuations. But again, the intensity of that can be worked with. Given our, what we're doing without taking care of our hormones, but also our inner critic and our wounding. It's almost like we're more sensitive to it. So there's more stuff to just come up. And when we've worked through a lot more of that, we don't get as much coming up in that PMS time, which is very interesting. But yeah, it's just anxiety that's pretty much always there, waiting, lurking, coming to annoy you and interrupt your happy life.
Yeah, the word lurking is quite interesting. Yeah, just it's always lingering there, ready to kind of spike up at any point. And I think what's stuck out for me from the five P's is they're also linked. Do you know, you feel that procrastination because you have such high levels of perfectionism, and because you have that perfectionism, you feel pressure and you want to please people. And then because you want to please people, that adds even more pressure. And then you feel anxious because of that. And it's just, they all link in together, but they all spiral around and feed each other.
Yes.
It's, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely its own beast, isn't it? And so what's beautiful though is that the resolve and the way through it is quite simple and complex at the same time. But I see it as simple because if we can shift from these fearful perspectives of ourselves that, coming from lack, coming from I'm not good enough, and we can shift into more compassion for ourselves, kindness. I call it shifting from fear into love. That's the simple way through anxiety. We if we're in a more loving state, if we're feeling more gratitude, more appreciation for ourselves, kindness, and compassion for ourselves rather than, look at me, I can't believe I'm feeling anxious again. I'm such a bad person. I'm such a burden. If we can actually say, you know what, like you're doing great today and I'm proud of you and I love you, that's going to help us move through this anxiety. And it can be that simple. But of course, the journey to get there takes a few different steps and approaches.
And to close, I feel like we've talked through a lot of the symptoms and a lot of the identification of anxiety, of high functioning anxiety, what it looks like, perhaps where it's come from, the causes of it. But what are some tips as a naturopath, so dealing with natural remedies? What would you advise are good places to start to deal with these symptoms while living our life, while, continuing to do what we want to do, achieve what we want to achieve? But how would you advise someone in how to approach these issues without letting them get out of hand?
Yes. I mean, I think I give a different answer to this question every time, just because not because it's there's not a clear framework. There's just so many different things we can do that are all part of that puzzle and helping us. And so I invite you, if you haven't found what's worked for you and you think nothing's working for me, nothing will work for me, well, question that because you just haven't found the thing yet. So just keep trying different things, keep trying different approaches. But some of the things that I love to break an anxious cycle when you're really like thinking a lot of thoughts and you're stuck in your mind is the cold shower. So this is where you have a regular warm shower and you just had cold at the end for about 30 seconds. You may have heard about this, become quite a popular thing to talk about, or even the ice bath if you're game. But a cold shower is enough. And what it does is it triggers your vagus nerve. It sends you into this rest and digest parasympathetic nervous system, which calms your body, calms your mind. It gets you distracted almost for a moment. It breaks the cycle of that thinking. Another one that I love is, I mean, I can talk more about supplements and things like that. We've got obviously magnesium is a really helpful one, but I would say my favorite supplement for anxiety. It's not available everywhere. I'm pretty sure it is available in Europe and the UK and all of that, and it's Kava, which is Kava, not Cava, the Kava in Spain. Kava with a K is very effective for helping to ease anxiety, especially in those stressful moments, and with minimal side effects. It can't be used long term, so we have to be careful with that. We can only use it for more of a short term basis, but that's a really beautiful one. I love also breath work, so working with our breath. There's so many different ways we can do it, but one of my favorites is working with our conscious connected breathing, which is where you're sort of doing a breathing process over at least 20 minutes usually. Maybe you can do it shorter, you can do 10 minutes, but this isn't just your, box breathing where you're counting 4 breaths, holding for 4, out for 4, hold for 4, which also is helpful. But when you're really anxious, you want to get that emotional energy moving through you, and a more of an intense breathwork session where you're doing a longer breathe like that, what's really helping release and move energy through your body, is usually much more effective than the I'm just going to be zen and try and calm myself. Often that makes it worse because we feel even more anxious that we're not feeling calm. Uh, Another one that's great is lying down with your legs up the wall. So this is where we are essentially, it's a yoga pose, and your body looks like an L shape. And by being in this position, it's sending the blood flow from your legs, your limbs back towards your heart and your abdomen. And that's mimicking what happens when your nervous system switches from that activated sympathetic state where we're really stressed into the parasympathetic rest and digest mode. So you're just letting gravity do its thing there. Try it sometime. It's a really beautiful one. You hold it for about 15 minutes. You can stay there for half an hour if you want. You don't have to go anywhere, but I love it because you can still have the TV on if you want, or you could be reading a book, you could be scrolling on Instagram if you want to. But it's just one of those things that your body is going to be moving into that more relaxed state without having to, say, go into a deep meditation. Of course, you can do things like that too. And the last one I'll say is simply a practice of being aware of this anxious, unsettled, emotional, sensitive part of you as like a really scared little child version of you. That's where it's coming from. There was once a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old you who was feeling this fear. And if we can see ourselves from that perspective, bring compassion, bring kindness and love to ourselves, that really does go a long way, really soothing ourselves rather than chastising ourselves for what we're feeling.
Some really great tips to think over and just mull over, I guess, what works for you. You very much said it, try what works for you and think about it. And very interesting points to mull over. So, Georgie, thank you so much for joining. We've covered a lot, and it's super interesting to have conversations. I guess just digging right into these subjects and understanding them more, breaking them down, and finding the source, I think, of them is super interesting as a thing to do. So if people want to follow you online and keep up to date with you, where should they go? And also, I want to hear about your new book. Can you just give us a little summary of that as well?
Yes. So my new book is called Master Your Relationship Anxiety. So it's specifically exploring the anxiety that can come up in relationships with our worries like, what if they leave me? What if I can't trust them? Or even if you're in a happy, healthy relationship, you might have the thought of like, what if something happens to them that's plaguing you? If you're single, you can also get a lot out of this book. There's chapters around, like what if I'm alone forever, or what if I'm in a bad situation, red flags, green flags, navigating all of that. And the last element is the what if I need space all the time, or if I'm going to lose myself in this relationship, which is a big fear that comes up. So that is a book that will take you through all of that. And it's available online. You can certainly order it from my website, which is georgiecollinson.com. Or on Instagram, you can find me at Georgie the Naturopath, which is where I like to hang out. And please say hello if you want to.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Georgie.
Thank you so much.